Thank you, guys. The next question asks a little bit about is America a democracy, but these guys wonderfully answered that already. And it may sound like a given answer that we are not a democracy, but I hear it all of the time, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we emphasize that we were a constitutional republic and not a democracy, because we are not. And so the next question focuses on that. Should we be more democratic, or should we be less? And I'm going to go to Dr. Mabey first, and then we'll come back around to you here.
So the question, as I understand it, is a normative question. Should we be more democratic, assuming that we're not at this point? And I guess my answer is let's ask what I guess I want to answer the question, which is what do we mean by democracy? If we mean that democracy means that free and open elections in which everyone can participate, in which majorities prevail over minorities, and where the rights of minorities, on the other hand, are still respected, and where popular will generally gets translated into public policy, then I'm in favor of that, and I think we have a way to go in that respect. There are a number of changes that we would need to make. The process by which we elect the president in this country is through an electoral college process, gives stronger advantages, or at least stronger advantages to less populated states than more populated states. The Senate, as it currently operates, is an extraordinarily undemocratic body. The 36 million people in California are represented by 2 senators, and the 500,000 people, along with the Moose and the Eagles in Alaska, are represented by 2 United States senators. Extraordinarily undemocratic, and we face the prospect of an unelected Supreme Court turning down a health care bill that was passed by an elected Senate, elected House of Representatives, and signed by the President. So those features of our current system make us a lot less democratic than we can be. We should be still operating under a system of representative government. There are other things as well, and perhaps we'll talk about them later. Our single-member district system of electing members to the House of Representatives is, in my view, a good deal less democratic than a proportional representation option, which would benefit the Green Party, benefit Socialist Party, and even benefit my friends in the Tea Party as well. But we can talk more about that later.
Yeah. It was already mentioned by earlier speakers, I think our representative from the Chicago Board of Elections, that in some states there is more democracy in the forms of various initiatives and things of this nature. I think we could become more democracy, have more democracy, if more states had opportunities for citizens to have various types of initiatives. However, I'm not in favor of, willy-nilly initiatives, because the populace is not able to, run things on a 100% democracy basis. There are too many issues for the large mass of population to keep up with, be able to give their intelligent input to. But there could be some, particularly on process matters, whether constitutional amendments for states or other things like that, where you could have a process where the electorate could have an ability to get something on the ballot, as well as now having to go through a legislative body and things of this nature. So there are a number of areas where I think greater democracy is appropriate. It's an outlet for the people to express it when the things are tied up in other avenues. I think if you're going to have any type of system that allows for voting on issues of policy, particularly we were talking about earlier, the imbalance in California, you would need to have something that if there was some kind of initiative that involved at all spending, you would have to explain, if you're increasing spending, where the extra revenues are going to come from. You have to say we're going to have such and such tax increases. Or if you're going to have tax cuts, where tax cuts were going to be coming from. Something of this nature. You can't have some kind of balance in that, then I would think that any measures relating to spending would probably have to be off limits as far as initiative process. And then adding to the comments by one of the other speakers, I think the lady from the Green Party, obviously in a democracy, if we're going to have relatively more equalized capacity to influence the elections, some limitations upon spending, which probably at this point requires a U.S. constitutional amendment, I think is something that would be in the interest of a greater democracy in the sense of equalizing fields.
We don't have a formal stance on, I'm not sure what more democracy means. I made reference earlier to the California version of it. We know what's going on in Wisconsin right now. And it is healthy for elections to have consequences. Illinois was in the spotlight within the span of a month and a half. I was not far from here at Smith School, and watching the Secret Service and working with them and the assembled media from around the world as the next President of the United States was presumably voting for himself. We don't know for sure, but as well as his wife, it was an amazing scene. But whether or not we want to go with all these different referendum questions, I'm not sure if that's really productive or recall to the degree that we're seeing in Wisconsin. Regardless of which side of that issue you may be on, there are definite pros and cons to having such an immense amount of money being spent on so many elections. So elections do and should have consequences. And the same, and what I was getting at earlier is we had within a month and a half of the president being elected, and that scene that we saw in Grant Park, we had our governor indicted over the allegation of attempting to sell the very seat that the president formerly had. So our same voters who were ridiculed for, how do they pick this Rod Blagojevich person? They've also chosen Paul Simon and Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and a myriad other Democrats and Republicans, but they did choose this Rod Blagojevich for governor. So ultimately, it led to action by the representatives who were elected by the people to remove that. And I'm not sure if we want to go to some kind of recall system where we're in perpetual election and unelection mode. That all said, we're pleased that we are a creature of a referendum. The Chicago Board of Election Commissioners was created after there was a crusade to take the elections back from elected officials. There was a spirited effort to go against Tammany Hall in New York, and there was a spirited effort here led by former Mayor Joseph Medill. By that time, he was the publisher of the Chicago Tribune, and it was opposed strongly by the Democratic Party, the unions that was taking shape at the time in 1885. But the voters overwhelmingly voted to take the election apparatus and put it under the control indirectly of the courts through an independent panel, so that an elected official wasn't counting his or her own votes. So part of me believes that referendums are great. Referenda are great, but referenda on everything, I'm not sure. So what we'd like to see more than anything else is for the system to become more inclusive, and that's something that's going to happen at the legislative level. And by more inclusive, I mean giving people the opportunity to register even on election day. That hasn't been embraced here yet. It has been in our neighboring states in Minnesota and Wisconsin. There are consequences with that too. In Minnesota, they woke up one day and found Jesse Ventura was elected with a heavy. There was a split between the Republicans and Democrats, and an independent came in, and a lot of college students woke up that morning and decided they had these action figure dolls that they traded, and they went out to the polls, and they were one of the big constituent groups who elected Jesse Ventura. But overall, same-day registration has been a boom wherever it's offered in terms of participation and turnout, because you're able to make in one motion take care of in one step the act of voting and registration. It's easy for all of us who have lived in the same location for 15, 20 years to say we don't need same-day registration, but the fact of the matter is the biggest losses we've had in the voter rolls are those 18 to 44. And those are the people who are most mobile. And the younger they are, the more mobile they are. And those are the biggest losses we've had over the last 4 years. And they don't understand this antiquated pen and paper system where we have to have an original ink signature on a form and you have to turn that form in. They live and breathe with those cell phones that they can manage their bank accounts, they can move to a new apartment, their cell phone account follows them, they can arrange their new cable bill, they can take care of everything else, but they can't do that online. So we're hoping to try to bridge that in the coming year and try to offer somewhat an online registration, but until the legislature authorizes it, we're not going to have a pure online registration or a same-day registration system.
It's interesting you should mention Mr. Blagojevich because I actually ran in that election for lieutenant governor. And people say, you know, if you had won, if Whitney had won, you'd be governor now, like Quinn. I say, no, because you know what? Rich Whitney wouldn't be in jail now. So we have some bumper stickers that say, don't blame me, I voted for Whitney. So the question really is, what's your group's stance on democracy? Well, I can't speak for the group because we're a democratic organization. I just realized that. But I can say, generally, we really do believe that that we are a democracy. We should be a democracy. And if we aren't, we should really work toward being a better democracy. And we aren't a good democracy at this point. As a community organizer actually since I've been in high school, I live and breathe principles of democracy. My goal is to, and currently I'm working in Englewood. I just formed an organization in Englewood called the Greater Englewood Garden Association. And these people have a total democracy. If we don't hear from the grassroots, and if people don't control their own destinies, frankly, for me, there's no point in going on. But I'll tell you, I think sometimes I wake up really depressed in the morning when I think of the Citizens United decision, because that, to me, is almost the death knell of democracy. What we have in that, if you're not familiar with Citizens United, is corporate personhood. So those people we don't take money from now are really in a position of running our total government. So I think this is something we really do have to be concerned about. We are running, and I'll talk more about this later, but there's move to amend, and I'll mention that later on. What we really are, however, is what we would call a corporatocracy. We are ruled by the wealthy, where money and power can buy candidates in elections and therefore control our laws. That's what's going on in this country, whether you know it or not. It's what's going on. And I see a lot of head shaking, so I think we're in a lot of agreement here. So the Green Party's first goal is to reestablish our democracy. And again, I refer to the move to amend. There is an effort now to amend the Constitution to reverse this corporate personhood stance. In a way, I think the simple solution is just to say if a corporation is a person, it's got a lifespan of, let's say, 80 years, 85. They should die at 85, right? You know, if you're a person, be a person. If you're not a person, be a group of people who run a business and follow the rules of the state you are chartered in so that you become the kind of corporation that you say in your mission statement you are. Currently, they don't do that. So I do think that there are alternatives, possibly. You know, there's such a thing as instant runoff voting. In the Green Party, this is how we run our in-party elections. So that you just feel you don't, quote unquote, waste your vote. You can vote for first choice, second choice, and third choice. And your choices will count. Any vote you give, they will count. The other thing, and I just remembered this as you were talking about Pat Quinn, I think it was 1980, right? When he reduced the size of our legislature to save money. We used to have, if you recall, 3 people in the House for every district. Every district had 3 representatives. That was one of the best forms, a kind of instant runoff variation, but one of the best forms of democracy, because if you were running as an independent, you got people to give you their 3 votes, you could win. So we really had an opportunity, and we did have independent people in our legislature at the time. Now it's the Republicans, up and down the line. So the other thing is, and I guess I'm kind of tempted to think that the parliamentary system is not such a bad system. Because if we were, and I don't know where I have that number right now, but if we were, I'll look that up, but we'd actually, if we had a parliamentary system, we'd have Greens in the state legislature now. And I'll explain that in another question. But just a description of how difficult I actually do have a number right here. Rich Whitney got over 360,000 votes when I ran with Rich in that gubernatorial election. So over 360,000 people in the state of Illinois thought that Rich Whitney would make a good governor. I like to think some of them thought I'd be a good lieutenant governor. So that was 10.5% of the vote. So my question to the people in this audience and the people at the table is, shouldn't 360,000 people in the state of Illinois be represented in the legislature? I think they should. So again, the parliamentary system. If we had a parliamentary system, we would have 6 senators and 13 state representatives in the Illinois legislature on the basis of that election. Thank you.
Well, I with all due respect, I want to disagree with the whole hullabaloo about referendums. I mean, I think that's a red herring. I think much more important is the question of proportional representation, which you were just bringing up in terms of using the Greens example. And I'd like to also agree with all the things Dr. Measy was pointing out that could be reformed in terms of the Senate being undemocratic, in terms of single-member districts as opposed to proportional representation, and so on. But in terms of just stating sort of the obvious, in terms of believing in democracy, is I think, I usually wouldn't use this quote, but when I look around this room and realize I'm in church, I would have to say that I believe that it's true that the voice of the people is the voice of God. And in that sense, I'm a complete Democrat, small d. I don't work for Streets and Sand. In other words, I believe in democracy. I live in the first ward, so we'll talk sometime about how honest the elections are. But I believe in complete democracy because I think there's a lot of evidence, again, that for all the faults that people make, electing Blagojevich might have been one, but there might have been worse candidates they could have elected. Not electing Rich Whitney was obviously a mistake on the people's parts from my point of view. But when all is said and done, I think the people will be right more often than any self-appointed elite. And because of that, I think we need more democracy, not less. And the problems of democracy are best solved by more democracy.
Because I don't want to let this opportunity pass me by, the libertarian I would like to say, with regard to the first question and a lot of what he just said, I agree with my socialist friend here on the panel. Us libertarians don't get to say that very often. A couple of things I'll touch on in ways that should we be more democratic. I'll give you ways I think we should not and a few ways that I think we should. I'm not a big fan of referenda. I think California and the insanity that bears out in California proves me right on this. However, under our federalist system, if California wants to referenda itself off a cliff, they're welcome to do so. I can choose not to be a part of that by not living in California. That's a choice that I actively currently make, not living in California. So I have no problem with states employing referenda if that is what the states decide is the best thing for them. I may disagree with it, and I'll not choose to live in those states, but I would adamantly be opposed to that on a federal level. An area where I think we should not be, not be more democratic is the United States Senate. I think one of the big mistakes that was made was the amendment to the Constitution that made senators popularly elected. The House of Representatives is the voice of the people in government. The voice of the states was to be the Senate, which is why the Senate was, the two senators were originally elected by the legislatures of the state. So you could even say they are one step removed from being directly elected there. The people directly elect their representatives to the state legislature who then elect their senators. But they were there to represent the states. Well, now they're there again representing the people. So we have two chambers now representing the people and none representing the interest of the states, which is not necessarily always going to be the same. So I would like to see that amendment repealed and return to a system where we have senators elected by our state legislatures, for better or for worse. It's the way that it should be. Touching on the courts, as my colleague to the right of me here did, again, another system that the purpose of the lifetime appointment to the court is to put some sort of a wall of separation between them and the political process, that they're not coming up for election again. Now, if he pointed out that Obamacare was something that was passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate and signed by the President. Now, if the House of Representatives, the Senate passed a bill and the President signed it, determining to execute all people that think like me, we have a prohibition on that. It would violate the Constitution. To strip the free speech from people who believe what I do. It would not be allowed to stand. So the question about Obamacare should not be, was it passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the President? Procedurally, yes, it was. The question should be, is it constitutional? I'd argue it's not, but that again is the purview of the Supreme Court of the United States. Something I am sympathetic to in terms of increasing democracy is proportional representation. I am as resentful of the Republicans as my friend from the Green Party is, although I would offer that the Libertarian Party also provides an alternative for people to the Republicans and the Democrats. I think proportional representation is something I'm certainly willing to consider as a better direction for the House of Representatives in terms of representing the people of this country. And the last thing I would like to touch on is the Citizens United decision. If anybody knows the Bughouse Square debates, I was honored to be a soapbox speaker there last year. And Citizens United was the topic that I talked on. Citizens United was correctly decided, in my opinion. You say, corporations aren't people. Corporations are entities made up of individual people. Now, it makes no sense to me whatsoever that a group of people gathered together have fewer rights together than they do individually. We don't say that about unions, and we don't say that about the Sierra Club, we don't say that about the NAACP, we don't say that about, pick your favorite organization. They wish to come together to expend money to speak. Either they are completely within their rights to do so. It is not some outlawing corporate personhood or putting some kind of arbitrary controls on the amount of money in politics. Is not some panacea or silver bullet that is going to fix the problems that our country has. All the money in the world behind advertising behind New Coke couldn't sell it to people that thought it tasted awful. All the money in the world couldn't sell the Edsel to people that realized it was an awful car. And I'm deeply dubious of people that say that all we have to do is get the money out of politics and all of our problems are going to be fixed. They seem often to be the same people who advocate for more direct democracy, but then seem to think people are incapable of seeing through advertising dollars for what people really are. So I'm deeply skeptical of that. Fix the money out of politics is a nice bumper sticker, but it is far from any kind of a silver bullet that is going to fix the country's problems.